The music industry has seen many iconic figures, but few duos have captured hearts like the phenomenal Hall and Oates. With legendary hits like Rich Girl or Sarah Smile, the pair had the world dancing in the 1970s, and they reached heights that musicians could only dream of. Yet behind all this, a heartbreaking story would be taking shape. Soon, they would have the musical world mourning this harmonious duo when their relationship began to crumble into one of the most bitter betrayals that shattered their band and bond. It was a dramatic fall from fame for the Hall & Oates brand, and for 50 years, the public only saw the polished exterior. But in November 2023, the facade finally shattered. A shocking lawsuit, a restraining order, and accusations of the ultimate betrayal exposed a bitter conflict that had been festering for decades. This wasn't just a breakup, it was an all-out war. And as the dust settles, John Oates, at 76, is finally speaking out about how his partner of 5 decades, Daryl Hall, may have just permanently ruined his reputation. The first domino fell in November 2023, and it landed with the force of an atomic bomb. News outlets scrambled as court documents were filed in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a lawsuit, Daryl Hall versus John Oates. But this was far more than a simple financial disagreement. Hall had also filed for, and was granted, a temporary restraining order against his musical partner of over 50 years. The news sent a shockwave through the music world. A restraining order is a tool for emergencies, typically used to prevent imminent harm. The public's imagination ran wild. What could John Oates have possibly done to warrant such an extreme legal action from the man who was like his brother? The court documents were sealed, shrouded in secrecy, which only fueled the rampant speculation. For weeks, the media and fans were left in the dark, with only the most dramatic and damaging-sounding legal terms to discuss. When the records were finally unsealed, the language was devastating. Daryl Hall, in his own declaration, accused John Oates of a completely clandestine and bad faith move. He called it, quote, the ultimate partnership betrayal. With those few words, the narrative was set in stone. John Oates was the villain, and Daryl Hall was the victim. But the betrayal Hall was describing wasn't one of personal violence, it was one of business. So what was this ultimate betrayal? It was not a stolen song or a secret love affair. The entire 50-year partnership was imploding over a business entity, a limited liability partnership named Whole Oats Enterprises. This company was the crown jewel of their empire. It was the legal vessel that held the rights to nearly everything bearing the Hall & Oates name. Their trademarks, their personal name and likeness, their website, their social media assets, and, most importantly, their record royalty income. According to Hall's furious declaration, John Oates had engaged in a secret negotiation to sell his entire 50% share of Whole Oats Enterprises to a third-party investment firm, a company called Primary Wave Music. Hall claimed this move was a complete and total blindside. He stated that their business agreement explicitly forbade either partner from selling their stake without the other's written consent. What made the move so clandestine, in Hall's eyes, was the timing. The duo was already engaged in a separate private mediation to negotiate a global divorce and untangle their many other shared business ventures. Hall believed they were negotiating this separation in good faith, all while Oates was allegedly and secretly negotiating the sale of the brand's entire future to an outside corporation. To Daryl Hall, this was not just a simple business transaction, it was an ambush. He had no desire to be forced into a partnership with Primary Wave, and he viewed Oates' move as a hostile takeover of the legacy he had spent his entire life building. While the 2023 lawsuit was the moment the partnership officially died, the public execution had actually begun a year earlier at the hands of Daryl Hall himself. For decades, fans had viewed the duo as the ultimate musical brothers, a perception both men had cultivated. But in 2022, Daryl Hall went on a podcast and casually dropped a grenade on their entire 50-year legacy. He famously stated, "You think John Oates is my partner? He's my business partner. He's not my creative partner." He insisted that fans misunderstood the relationship, claiming they were separate individuals who just made records together. This single comment was a seismic shift. It was a public demotion of John Oates from co-creator to, essentially, an employee with a good contract. Hall was effectively telling the world that he was the talent and Oates was just along for the ride. This wasn't just a one-off remark. As the legal battle heated up, Hall doubled down on this narrative, claiming in 2025 that he wrote, quote, about 90% of the songs. He even began comparing his new collaborations to his old ones, calling his work with another musician more meaningful and a real collaborative relationship. The message was clear and brutal. The Hall and Oates partnership was, in his view, a creative fraud, and John Oates' contributions were minimal. For months, John Oates remained almost entirely silent, bound by the confidentiality of the legal proceedings. The public narrative was completely one-sided, with Hall's accusations of betrayal echoing across the internet, painting Oates as a backstabber. But in May 2024, Oates, at 76, finally gave his side of the story. In a revealing interview, he didn't just counter Hall's claims, he validated them. He flat-out agreed with Hall's assessment, stating that they had not been creative partners in over 20 years. Oates described their relationship in its final decades as a cold, professional arrangement. He explained, quote, "We'd show up at a show individually, walk on stage, play, and then we'd go our separate ways." This admission was stunning. The brotherly bond fans adored had been a fantasy imagination for decades. Oates then reframed the entire dispute. He claimed Hall had always wanted to be his own man and be perceived as an individual. So, Oates figured he would give him exactly what he wanted by selling his own share and dissolving the business. He insisted his move wasn't a betrayal, it was a frustrated business decision to escape a partnership that he claimed was ruining his life. He was just trying to step aside, but Hall didn't like the idea. And this is where the entire narrative twists. For 50 years, John Oates was the quiet partner, the steady anchor to Hall's soaring vocals. But by 2022, Daryl Hall began a relentless public campaign to diminish his partner's legacy, recasting him as a simple business partner. He was effectively rewriting history in real time, priming the public to see Oates as a non-essential part of the duo's creative genius. Then, when Oates finally decided to act like the business partner Hall had insisted he was, by making a business decision to sell his own assets, Hall sprung his trap. He didn't just file a private lawsuit, he filed for a public restraining order, a move loaded with implications, and fed the media the ultimate betrayal narrative. This aggressive public attack was the real reputational damage. Hall's actions painted Oates as a greedy traitor who had destroyed their friendship. At 76 years old, John Oates was suddenly forced into a corner, having to publicly defend his entire life's work and prove that he was, in fact, a co-creator, and not just a glorified backup musician. In his quest to control the narrative and the brand, Daryl Hall may have been the one who truly, and perhaps permanently, ruined John Oates' reputation. But Hall's narrative conveniently ignored one major thing: the hard facts of their song catalog. Daryl Hall's claim that he was the creative force who wrote 90% of the music is not just an exaggeration, it's provably false. A quick look at the songwriting credits on their biggest, most enduring hits reveals a much more collaborative picture. The song Maneater, which was their longest-running #1 hit, was built from a prototype that John Oates himself had written. Oates has explained that he originally wrote it as a reggae song about the greed and spoiled riches of 1980s New York City. It was Hall who suggested changing the groove to a Motown feel, but the song's concept and core structure originated with Oates. Their final #1 hit, Out of Touch, also began with Oates. He was playing with a synthesizer he barely knew how to use when he came up with the chorus. He thought it might be a good song for another band, but a producer convinced him it was a hit for them. Only then did he and Hall co-write the verses to complete it. The story is the same for many of their other classics. I Can't Go For That, No Can Do, Sarah Smile, You Make My Dreams, and the iconic She's Gone are all officially credited as co-writes between Hall and Oates. Oates was also the sole writer and lead vocalist on several other tracks. He was not just a business partner, he was a co-creator, a lead guitarist, and a member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame. So, why did Daryl Hall react with such legal fury? Why fight so hard to stop Oates from selling to Primary Wave? The answer, ironically, is that Primary Wave already owned a significant interest in the Hall & Oates song catalog, including a share of Hall's own publishing. Years earlier, Hall had sold a stake in his catalog, a move he reportedly came to regret. In 2021, he gave an interview where he warned artists, "Never sell your publishing, it's all you have." Hall's own declaration in the lawsuit makes his motives clear. He stated that he had no intention of becoming partners with Primary Wave and that he did not agree with Primary Wave's business model. This was never just about a friendship, it was about legacy and ultimately control. By selling his share, Oates would be forcing Hall into a new 50-50 partnership with a massive corporation he openly disliked, giving them equal say over the entire Hall & Oates brand. The lawsuit, the restraining order, and the public smearing of Oates' reputation were all just tools in a desperate attempt to maintain total control over the empire he had built. But the damage was done. When asked in 2025 if a reunion was possible, Hall gave a final, brutal verdict on their relationship, stating, "That ship has gone to the bottom of the ocean." In the end, the 50-year partnership of Hall & Oates did not end with a respectful bow, but with a public and brutal legal war. Their legendary music, the soundtrack for a generation, will undoubtedly live forever. But the brand Hall & Oates is now permanently shattered, tainted by accusations of betrayal and decades of hidden resentment. The public is left to wonder, was John Oates a backstabber who tried to secretly sell his partner's legacy out from under him? Or was Daryl Hall a controlling frontman who, when he couldn't get his way, launched a public attack to ruin the reputation of the man who stood beside him for half a century? The truth is, the friendship that fans adored had been a hollow shell corporation for over 20 years. The lawsuit was just the final, bitter end to a partnership that had long been reduced to nothing but business, ego, and money. But what do you think? After hearing the whole story, who was really in the wrong? Was Daryl Hall just protecting his life's work, or was John Oates justified in trying to sell his share? Let me know your final verdict in the comments below, and subscribe to Retro Celeb Talk for more stories behind the music.